Morant with a running start. Elevates. Oh, it dunks. Oh, my goodness. Tie game in overtime. Gasol will turn. His heat is gone. Memphis on top. 7-10 remaining. Conley now with three. Count it. A 15-point lead for Memphis. And Blake Griffin gets into it on the floor with Randolph. Hard to tell if there are any punches being thrown under there, but Griffin took acceptance. Adams going long. Morant. Oh, he hit it. Ja Morant, insanity.
You gotta be kidding me.
Welcome to Grits and Grinds, a Memphis Grizzlies podcast. My name is Keith Parrish. On today's episode, I have Josh Lloyd from Locked On Fantasy Basketball. This is kind of an off-season Grizzlies fantasy preview. So, Josh, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Keith, it is good to be back chatting with you on a podcast, which I feel like we've done, I don't know, 7 years in a row, 8 years in a row, whatever it is. It's been a lot of times we've done it.
I feel like it's been a few years, though, since we've actually podcasted. Yeah. Like I say, the first time was definitely like 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah.
But
that is probably true.
You're
actually.
busy. You got your thing. I got my. But here, yeah, I don't feel like we've crossed paths on podcasts in a little bit.
Yeah, maybe that's because the Memphis Grizzlies were just keeping me away from you. They just didn't want me to get in there. With now that you're contractually free and you're out.
That's right. That's right. They were like, hey, listen. And also, hey, let's be honest. You're locked on. You're a company man. So you got to do the Locked On Grizzlies. So it hasn't always worked. But you know what? I thought I would extend an olive branch and say, let's get Josh back on here. We got to talk about some fantasy stuff.
Well, this is, we extended that beef out to Vegas, Keith, because I kept taking your seat when we were there. Every time I see a spare seat, I go, who's sitting there? I go, it's Keith Parrish, good. I'm going to take it. And we just I feel like every day one of us was sitting in the other person's seat. But, we're here to mend fences and we're here to talk Grizzlies.
It's great. And it's awesome. Like we've been doing this honestly about the same amount of time. And we met in Vegas so many years ago. And it was great. We saw each other again this year in Vegas, and you kept just stealing my seat.
I did.
It's the most important thing is the seats being used. Okay. That's the most important thing.
That is true. You don't want it to go to waste.
The Memphis Grizzlies. I feel like, so I've been playing fantasy basketball, not frankly that long. Like, for a while there, I didn't really do it. I followed basketball. I thought there was something immoral about, like, if I'm all in on the Grizzlies as like a fan. Yeah. I don't want to have any conflicted emotions on like, oh, wait, I'm playing against Rudy Gay or whoever it was in like 2012. And I'm like, so I didn't do that. But then I finally caved. And now I am definitely very much so into fantasy basketball. And it's interesting to me as a Grizzlies fan, there were a lot of years where there weren't that many guys that you cared about having on your fantasy team. Like,
it's true.
But not, no one was super sexy or high in the draft. The last couple of years, you've had some people taking a little bit higher. This year, the Ja Morant suspension is going to hurt him there. But even beyond Ja, there's a lot of interesting fantasy players for the Grizzlies. And by the way, I should say, when we talk about fantasy basketball on this show, we're only talking about categories leagues. If you play in a points league, I'm sorry. Unless it's the negative fantasy league, which my proprietary negative fantasy league, but we're talking about category leagues, and in those, which is the true way to play fantasy basketball. But in those leagues, there's a lot of interesting players, and I would assume, and now I'm not really up to speed on the fantasy community in the offseason, but I assume Jaren right now is a pretty high draft pick for fantasy drafts this year.
Yeah, Yahoo, who is the main provider of fantasy leagues, the number one host site, I would say, put out their initial rankings the other day. They initially had him at number 10. They've already dropped him back to number 13, which it is very high. It is very high. Yeah. I've got some pretty significant disagreements with that, but he is going to be the first Grizzly off the board in basically every draft. Yeah.
So what, that is really high. And what are your reservations? I would say, I expect a big season from Jaren. I don't know how he stacks up against the other top fantasy players. What are your reservations right now with taking Jaren that high?
I expect a big season from Jaren as well. It's nothing to do with being against Jaren. It's just to do with the way that fantasy ranks can sometimes, not sometimes, how they are calculated. And I have been doing a ton of work on this on the off season. I haven't released all of my findings on it, but basically the way that the scoring is done and the rankings is done tends to overinflate the value of players with insanely high block numbers. And of course, Jaren led the league in blocks last season. He blocked 3 shots per game. But when you do fantasy scoring on that, it came out with a standard score, a Z score of like 4.8, which it means that there is like, in terms of you're going to convert that to probabilities, if things were distributed normally, this is a lot of stat nerd stuff, but it would
right.
mean that
You've already made me glaze over a little bit, but I'll hope you'll pull me through this section.
Basically what it means is if for someone to, the way that it gets scored in terms of putting into rankings means that there's an implied probability that that sort of a season is a 1 in 500,000 chance of happening. Now, it was a really good season, but it wasn't that good. Like, it's not like a 1 in 500,000 chance of someone averaging three blocks a game. So the fact that that implied probability then turns into where the ranking goes, it makes it, well, look how good Jaren was. He was the 10th best player. Like, he actually wasn't. Like, he was good. He was really good. And he still probably is going to be really good, but he's not that good. And the other thing about it is that towards the end of last season, when we saw Ja go in and out of lineups with suspensions and health retreats and whatever was happening, Jaren Jackson's block rate just basically returned to what it had been in previous years, which was a full block per 100 possessions, fewer than what it was over the course of the season. So if he drops from 3 blocks a game to a still unbelievably good 2.4 blocks a game or 2.5 blocks a game, well, even according to those ranking numbers, that's probably a 10, 12 spot drop straight away. So I think if you invest in him really early, and we could all expect that his scoring is going to go up without Ja, I think that's fair, but can he play more than 30 minutes? I don't know. And if he does that mean he has to be really extra cautious with the fouls? And then if he does that mean he doesn't go for as many blocks? So I just think if you take him at pick 13, I think it's a gigantic waste, even though I really like Jaren Jackson.
So when you talk about that Z score, or you talk about how much, like, he got so many more blocks compared to everyone else, like he was this big outlier with how many blocks he got. Does it matter at all that I think in this coming fantasy season, there's going to be more block shots available in my mind? I don't know if this is true or not, but in my mind, I'm like, Wembanyama's going to block a lot of shots. You have Kessler now, who's going to block a lot of shots. You have Chet Holmgren on the Thunder is going to block a lot of shots. Miles Turner might get a full season. Like, it's not going to be Jaren and Brook Lopez maybe by themselves as the block leaders this season.
That is absolutely true. So the scarcity of that number changes because you're going to have probably Victor and Chet, I would say, block over 2 shots per game. You're going to have Kessler playing probably 30 minutes a game as well. So all those 3 guys just added in, it turns into a situation where, even though like there were 6 guys last season who blocked 2 shots per game, Jaren, Claxton, Lopez, Kessler still blocked 2.3, Miles Turner and Anthony Davis, right? But there's no reason that Mitchell Robinson can't get back up to that area. There's no reason that Evan Mobley can't jump even back to that area. Plus you had Victor and Chet into that mix also. And that means that scarcity drops down. And we can say that Jaren blocked way more shots than everyone else. It is true, Keith, but it's half a shot a game. Like, it's not that much. It's 1 block extra every 2 games. So while when you look at, when you bring it into standard scores, it looks gigantic, but it's half a shot a game. And if Jaren goes from 3 blocks a game to 2.5 blocks a game, which I think is what he averaged over the final 25 games of the season, then he's just in with a mix of like 8 or 9 guys around the same number.
Yeah, I think when I look at Jaren and when I get excited about Jaren, and by the way, there's like no chance I end up with Jaren in any of my fantasy leagues because there's so many Grizzlies people around me in my fantasy leagues. I want to say in one of the Fast Break Breakfast listener leagues, like it's a 14-team league and like 7 of them were Grizzlies fans. So like in an auction scenario, it was just all, you wouldn't believe the prices for Conchar. I mean, it was just every Grizzlies player went. But I still think Jaren, even if his blocks drop all the way down, I still think he's going to have a big year. I look at how he did last year after the All-Star game, averaged 22 points per game. Like, I'm not going to be surprised this year if Jaren averages 20 points per game or 21 points per game, plus those 7 rebounds, 2 blocks and 1 steal. And then with making a 3 or so a game, that still is super enticing and is why, I don't know, if I were to play in a league without so many Grizzlies players, I would definitely be targeting him.
I think the part of it for me is that, like, I think he's going to be really good. Like, I've actually got him projected at like 22.5 points and almost two threes and still 2.5 blocks and really good percentages.
That points is high, by the way.
It's because Ja's going to miss the beginning of the season. So somebody's going to have to take more shots. So it's going to be higher early. It might be 24, and then it might come down to 21 at the end of the season. So sort of averaging out. And plus, we know Ja's going to miss 25 games, but Is that all he's going to miss? Like he is going to.
That's right.
He's,
He has to not screw up for the next 6 months.
And it's not even that.
Like it's not 25 games. It's literally, I mean, I guess technically we're down to 4 months now. Yeah.
It's minimum 25
4 more months to go. Stay off Instagram.
And then he's got to do that. But then, Keith, he's also got to make sure he doesn't sprain his ankle or hurt his knee or land on his back because he gets undercut going for a dunk. Like there were just so many things that like you already look at Ja and go, yeah, I think he's probably going to miss 15, 16 games anyway. And now they've taken 25 off the top of that. So you go, yeah, does he get to 50? Does he get to 45? Like, I don't even know. So there's going to be, maybe it's half a season where he's not there. So Jaren's going to be probably him. And we haven't even talked Desmond Bane, but they're going to just be running everything offensively, basically.
Right. And I think most Grizzlies fans were optimistic that like, why can't Jaren just play 30 minutes a game? I know
it's frustrating.
The public assessment of that is all foul trouble, but it's literally not. It's a coaching staff decision. They just don't play him that many minutes. And that is frustrating, especially when it comes to fantasy. I mean, I was just comparing, like, if this was like the 90s and you're like, people are like, oh, Jaren's not that good of a rebounder, not that good of a scorer. You're like, man, per possession or like per minute, his stuff, like if he played in like 1992 and was just playing, even if he was fouling out every single game and was playing 34 minutes, like look at his averages. They would be stunning, like 4 blocks per game, plus the mid-20s scoring. So the Ja suspension. Now, in fantasy, and this has gotten, I feel like over the last few years, it's gotten worse and worse. And some of that was obviously the weirdness of COVID. And then some of it has just been that like every team is into minutes management, load management, resting every other game. I feel like IR spots have gotten way more prevalent in fantasy basketball. And like, I used to be opposed to it. And now I'm like, no, we need multiple IR spots. Cause like, and some of it is just like, I play on ESPN a lot, and ESPN got very proactive about marking a guy out where it used to take them like 48 hours. And so then it became, okay,
straight away.
Yeah. So now it's like, we actually need to have IR spots. And so like, before we get to the Ja question, let's just go with the general question. In your estimation as a fantasy basketball expert, like what, is there an optimum number of IR slots and like how leagues should deal with players just being ruled out? And do you think a player should be listed as out when they're being load managed as opposed to being actually injured?
A lot of questions in there. How would the optimal, like I've got the ability to do it. I think I can get through them all.
Yes.
I think 3 is the right amount because like people will say, well, it's, I'll tell you why, because there'll be people like you who had that initial theory of like, I don't want any IR slots, but here's my point with it is that it creates an uneven league, right? Because if you're in a situation where you've got 2 of your best 3 players injured for multiple times of the season, well, the only way you can compete is then you have to drop him. Well, Kevin Durant's out for 6 weeks. Like, what am I going to do? Like, how can I deal with him plus 3 other injuries on my team that are a week? Like, I have to drop him. And you know who's in the position to be able to hold on to a guy who, go grab him and take the 0? Well, it's the team that's at the top of the standings that can afford to lose for the next 4 weeks, and they'll still be there. And then, oh, by the way, they get the 5th best player back onto their team for the playoffs, so their team becomes extra stacked. They're the guys that can afford that. So when you're in a situation where you can't hold on to the guys that you drafted because of injury, the teams that benefit are the teams at the top. And then there's that striation that happens. So the middle teams become worse, the top teams become better, teams give up earlier, there's no battle in the playoffs. So having that ability, and like in the NBA, someone gets hurt, like you don't have to cut them, you just put them on that injured slot. So, or you just have them on your roster. And I just think that it just creates, I know people go, oh, what about the tough decision? Yeah, the tough decision just means that the good teams get better. And I don't think anyone wants that in terms of competitiveness in a fantasy league, because it just leads to less interest and less competitiveness. And then teams stop setting their lineups earlier because they can't get anywhere. Because, well, look at this guy. He's got Kevin Durant just sitting there waiting to come back. How are we going to compete with him? And I don't think that leads to a fun environment. So I think that is probably why I want the extra slots, just to deal with that sort of stuff. Should they be marked out when they are load managing? Yeah. Like, why not? This is not, I don't think, why should I be punished or you be punished as a fantasy manager because of different designations of a player? Like it ends up hurting you the same way, but you're not making a decision whether this guy's hurt or resting. It's the same that some sites don't allow you to put a guy in injured reserve if he's suspended. Like, well, he's not actually injured. Okay, that's fine. You know what's another word that starts with I? Inactive. Just call it that, and then no one will complain.
Yeah.
It's not my fault that he got suspended. How was I going to know when he was drafted that he was going to take PEDs or that he was going to decide that he's going to be very freewheeling with the live button on Instagram? We've got no idea of any of those things. So why do I get punished again? And then I have to drop him because I can't stash him anywhere and the good teams pick him up. So I think you just need more liberal rules with that, because why should I have to give up on these players that I've drafted and are on my team because of things that are totally out of my control that then make the league unbalanced?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I definitely feel like the last couple of years, I feel like it's borderline unethical, but I do it because everyone else has to do it, where it's like, you have to make sure you don't move a healthy guy out of your IR so you can roster extra players, basically, where it's like, so-and-so Kelly Oubre set out this last game while I'm leaving him on inactive. Then like, I'm not actually going to move him back in the lineup because he doesn't play again until Friday or whatever. So you have to like so much of fantasy basketball. And maybe that's one reason that it isn't maybe as popular, because there's so many little confusing strategy things you just have to do. And that like, and one of them is like now balance the injured reserve thing. All right. So if you're leak,
well, I just want to quick, because you're right about that. But the way that there are easy solutions to this. But the problem is that like you say you're playing on ESPN and the other people are playing on Yahoo, the majority of them. It's because of the settings that are put in default. There's easy ways to do that, because yes, Fantrax, which is where I host most of my leagues, has a ton of customization. But there's a setting on there that if you have someone in your injured reserve who's no longer injured, you can set it so that you don't get scores counted for that day, so that loophole gets removed.
You can set it so that Josh.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like you're used to it, so you go, "Oh, I know how I'm going to exploit this." But in terms of getting new people in, like if you just have that as a regular rule, like hey, if a guy's injured and if he's not injured and he's in the injured spot, you got to move him out. Otherwise, you don't count. Like people easily adapt, and then that loophole and that extra level of attention or whatever it is that you pay there, or might give you an unfair advantage or whatever sort of an advantage, it's removed. But because of the way that sites set up all their default settings, it's never going to happen. You have to have a dedicated commissioner who'll put you on a different side, who'll change these rules, who'll then enable you not to have that advantage by holding a guy there and getting extra guys in to get extra games played, because then there are limits you can put on things. There's a whole bunch of stuff. But because the sites are so lazy, they don't change all the default stuff. So it leads to those problems, which then compound into these issues that you're talking about.
Yeah, my negative fantasy league for the Fast Break Breakfast patrons, that's on Fantrax, because we have to have the customizable options. I'll be real, I don't have the time or attention level to customize all the other regular leagues. But going back to IRs or just inactive slots, that's going to be big for Ja Morant. And I think one of the big question marks is, how do you deal with Ja Morant or any other player who's going to miss a huge chunk of time? Like you look at Ja Morant, you're like, okay, 27 points per game, 8 assists per game, but it's going to miss the first third of the season. Not just that, that's like in most leagues, that's half your fantasy season or so, that's a big chunk of your fantasy regular season. So how do you like, when's a good time to take Ja, or like, are you personally avoiding Ja? Like how do you go into a draft knowing, or like what your strategy should be, knowing that Ja is going to miss, even when healthy, best case scenario is going to miss the first 25 games?
It is really tough with Morant because his value is a little bit all over the place. The other thing you have to realize is that depending on how when you set your playoffs, like the end of the season, you might not play the last 2 to 3 weeks of the season as well. So you might get 40 games out of him. You might get 35 games out of him, but they might be important ones in your fantasy season. Now, last season, when we entered the fantasy draft season, Ja Morant was ranked on Yahoo at the same spot that Jaren is now, number 13, which was just way too high, right? For all of his strengths in scoring, which are there, he is below average in so many other categories. He doesn't hit threes, doesn't get steals. His field goal and free throw percentage are below average. He doesn't block shots. His rebounds are low. He gets a lot of points and he gets good assists, but that's it. But he gets overvalued because he's Ja Morant. But this year, he's at 79, which is really, really low. And I think even with the missed games, like, if you're in that spot, that's halfway through a draft, basically, where a lot of those picks that you're taking around that area, what you're hoping for, and part of the way to win, like it's very hard to win your fantasy league in round 1, 2, and 3, right? It's really just hard to do because those guys are probably going to be in that same area. It's very hard to find a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at pick 50 who ends up as a top 5 guy. That's hard to do. You just hope that those guys don't get hurt or maintain their production. Where the value comes is getting guys in round 10 or round 9 who turn into top 40 guys. And if Ja is ranked here at 79 and then starts falling to the 80s or 90s, yes, he has to sit out the start of the season, and you have to look at your injured reserve rules. But I think he can outperform that number pretty easily. And if he can withstand those first 25 games, first 6 weeks of the season, which is going to be tough. So if you get him at like 90 or something, I think that there is tremendous value in that. And I don't think that's outrageous to suggest that he will fall that far, because we already know that he's missing minimum 25 and it's probably going to be 35. It might be 40. So it really just depends. But 79 versus where he was 13 last season, it's a big discrepancy. And I'd be happy taking him if it falls past 79 into that 90 zone.
Yeah, and I also think there's some room for growth with Ja, at least statistically, like at least fantasy wise. His efficiency got worse last year, and his shooting got worse. Like his 3-pointers got worse. He started this season, if I remember correctly, not only was he on fire, but like he was making free throws coming out of the gate. And I'm like, oh, if Ja's an 85% free throw shooter, like game on. If this guy's Jimmy Butler, because he gets to the line a lot, like this is beyond fantasy. This is thinking about the Grizzlies. I'm like, oh, we'll be really good if Ja makes 85% of his free throws. But then it just fell apart, and he ended up not having as statistically good of a season.
Yeah, correct. Look, I didn't actually know. I didn't remember that. Like he finished 75%, but I'm looking at his game log here. So it's like 82, 77, 100, 91, 100, 80, 86. Like, all right, that's great. And then it's 75, 67, 56, 67, 57, 73, 60, 50, 55. I go, oh no, everything just dropped off. So I don't know what that meant.
I put out a really embarrassing episode last year, Josh, like a week into the season, or like maybe like 4 games into the season, where I was like, Ja Morant has leveled up. Because he was like 37 points per game, and he was hitting 88% of his free throws. And I was like, guys, this guy's leveled up. And then the rest of the year was kind of garbage. I mean, again, relative to Ja Morant being one of the best players in the NBA, it was more like, oh, this is just his second year again. It's good, but it's no longer like, oh, I thought he was going to be like the 3rd best player in the NBA. Not quite. All right. So we've talked about Jaren. We've talked about Ja. We got to talk about Desmond Bane. We'll do that right after this quick break. I want to tell you guys about Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Fantasy is a whole new way to play fantasy sports for cash. My favorite way to play Underdog Fantasy is with their private drafts. They have every sport, so right now you can do daily fantasy baseball against your friends. Also, depending on the state you live, you can play higher or lower against their stat projections and really bring home some big paydays with their specials and multipliers. And of course, there's fantasy football best ball. Those lobbies are now open and busy as people get excited for the upcoming NFL season. So if all that sounds appealing to you, sign up now using promo code FBBF, and they will match your first deposit up to $100. That is promo code FBBF, as in Fast Break Breakfast, for a match of $100 on your first deposit. Sign up for Underdog Fantasy and use that code FBBF to get a free $100 on me. All right, so Josh, talking about fantasy basketball and the Memphis Grizzlies. I'm all about Desmond Bane, and it angers me that I won't be able to beat out the other Grizzlies fans I play with in the fantasy leagues to get him. But I think Desmond Bane is going to be massive, not just in the first 25 games when Ja's out. He's going to be massive all season. I look at last year before he had his toe injury. It's only 13 games, very small sample size, but he was averaging basically 25 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists. I think he can do that. I think he can do that basically for the season. Maybe it's 24, 5 and 5, but I think it's going to be like massive numbers. And with the efficiency, as far as like, he's not killing your field goal percentage. He's making a bunch of threes. He has great free throw percentage. Like, I am super excited about Desmond Bane this coming season. Does the fantasy community currently agree with me?
Yeah, they do. He is ranked on Yahoo at 23. I think that's fair enough. I think he's probably going to end up pushing higher than that into the top 20 in drafts would be my guess. The interesting thing about him last season, his first 3 games, he didn't even get to 20 points scoring. He was like, shot 27, 19, and 36%. Yeah. Horrible numbers, but he had 6, 7, and 4 assists in those games. And then he started absolutely rolling, and the shots started falling, and the assists are there, and he's going to have to do that this season. So there is no reason that he can't average a pretty big assists while Morant is out, especially early in the season, with big scoring load, with good efficiency. He's not a bad rebounder as well. I think he's going to have a pretty big season. Like you mentioned, 25, 5 and 5. Like, I've got him at 24, 5 and 5 for the entire season. So I think he probably comes out of the gate at 26, 27. Honestly, maybe 27, 5 and 6 for the first 6 weeks, 2 months of the season is probably, I think, relatively reasonable for him. And I think he's going to have to up his playmaking, especially early on, because Marcus Smart is not as good of a distributor as what Tyus Jones is. So even later on, when Morant is back, like Bane is going to have to up that part of his game too.
Yeah, I'm super optimistic for what Desmond Bane can do. Do you particularly think that, like, is there any scenario of like a top 10 finish, a top 15 finish? Like, what does he have to do statistically to get there, I guess, to stand out? Is there anything, is he just not strong enough? Like maybe if he up to steals to like 1.5, like, is there a category where he could lift himself even higher if he pulls in those other numbers?
That's the thing, right? It's steals. Like the reason that, well, Steph is Steph, but Steph was able to be this top 5 guy because he had seasons where he'd get 2 steals and 1.7 steals, along with hitting 4.5 threes a game. Now Bane could hit 4.5 threes a game. That's possible. He could average 28 points a game. That's possible. But if he's able to get 1.7 steals, like I think that we always like to look at these things and go, if you came to me with a line, with a stat number where I think it's ridiculous, and if you came to me and said, Des Bane here is sitting here at the start of December, averaging 27 points with 4 threes, 5 rebounds, 7 assists, I go, absolutely, totally plausible. There's no way, like there's easy ways to get there. But can he do anything defensively with his little arms, get in there, get some steals? Can he get to 1.5 a game? Because if he does, that is a top 10 player. But if he sits at 1 a game, the way that Ja Morant sits with lower steals, which keeps him back, then he's probably not quite there. But I think everything else for him is relatively reliable.
Yeah. I mean, also maybe this is where we have the crossover. This would help your fantasy team and also would help the actual Grizzlies if he can get to the line even more. If he becomes, as opposed to, he's shooting 90%, but if he's taking 2 or 3 free throws a game, but if he could get that up to like 5 free throw attempts per game, which seems, I mean, that's a big jump for him. But when I think about his game, I think like that should be the next step for him in his 4th season.
Well, it's always important to look at, like, because it doesn't always happen this way, but when you look at players' career trajectories, right, and the free throw attempt rate, this is why, again, a lot of people have faith in, say, Bennedict Mathurin for the Pacers. He was able to get to the line 1,000,000 times as a rookie, and that just doesn't happen, right? Players just don't get to the line that much. But Bane's like free throw attempt rate, I'm just bringing it up at the moment, it has gone up every season of his career. Where is it? Yeah, it went from 0.98 to 1.4 to 0.14 to 0.218. So basically, we've a 50% increase from year 2 to year 3 in his free throw attempt rate, and another 50% increase is probably tough. But could he go to 25% free throw attempt rate, 26%? I think that's possible, especially again without Ja there, because part of the way you get free throw attempts is you have the ball in your hands more. You're asked to create more. You're asked to do more. So the longer the ball's in your hands, the more you're trying to do stuff, the more you're attacking the rim, that those attempts go up. So yeah, that is a thing which I do actually predict is going to go up this season, and that will drive him higher up the fantasy board.
Yep. So we have the 3 big names for the Grizzlies in Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Ja Morant. Now, is there anyone else who's next in your fantasy rankings or in the community's rankings right now for someone who might get drafted in most fantasy drafts?
It's pretty clearly Marcus Smart. Like, he was pretty strong last season. He's going to have a strong role all season. He's going to be elevated like everyone else early on in the season. I think he's going to remain starting for the rest of the year. He's a pretty clear, I think, top 100 player for this season. And actually, at the moment, Marcus Smart is ranked higher than Ja Morant on Yahoo's pre-draft board. Again, that's because of the Morant suspension, but Smart is going to be a pretty strong option. And after him, there becomes a pretty sizable drop-off. But there are those top 4 guys who are currently ranked in the top 80.
So if you end up with one of these guys in fantasy, like not Ja Morant, but if you have Marcus Smart, who we think is going to be a playmaker again, going to make some threes, always do his defensive stuff. You get Bane, you get Jaren. Are you going to be looking to like trade them away once Ja Morant comes back? Like, are you going to try to like predict the curve or like the regression? You're like, oh, I got Bane averaging 28 per game or 25 per game, but Ja's coming back, or Jaren. Like, you try to get ahead of that and be like, all right, now Ja's going to take up a bunch of shots. I mean, I know they can coexist, but are you going to try to aggressively try to sell high if those numbers do go up while Ja's out?
Like, it seems logical, right, Keith? And you make sense of it, but it depends like who you're in the league with. Like, if I'm in the league with you and I say, hey man, look at this, Bane's averaging 29 a game, and you're going to go, yeah, but Ja's coming back. And yeah, most people are going to think that. And it is really, really tough to be able to execute a sell high. Now, there are plenty of players across the fantasy basketball community who are reactive. Like at the start of last season, back to Ja Morant, like I'm talking about him being ranked 13 on Yahoo heading into the season. And I put out a video talking about the Yahoo ranks, and I put him on the thumbnail because I said, this is ridiculous. There's no way that he's the 14th best player in category. They've screwed it up. If you take him there, it's a huge mistake. It's a gigantic mistake. And then those first 4 games or whatever happened, and everyone was like clowning, like, man, you're going to apologize to Ja. You think, yes, you were wrong on that. And then, of course, everything reverted back because they took a 3-game sample size and extrapolated it out to the entire season, expecting that's what's going to happen. So there are some people who looked at it and they go, no, actually, Bane's taken the next step, or Jaren's an MVP candidate now, and he'll do this, and Ja will get hurt again, and Ja will get suspended. But as a general rule, most people know the score. That they know what, and especially if they are committed to playing or being a fan, and if you're in a league with Grizzlies fans, they all know what's going to happen. Ja Morant's going to come back. He's going to go back to the number 1 usage player. So in most cases, it's better just to ride with it and go.
I think what you're what you're saying, Josh. What I'm hearing you're saying is you need to buy high. You need to go to the person who has Desmond Bane on the roster and be like, hey man, Ja's going to mess this up. I'm ready to pay a premium. And then maybe try to do some reverse logic on him, freak him out and be like, yeah, I don't know if you can trust that. You know, that number's coming down. Listen, I'll let you, it'll look good. Like you're selling high. I'll package this here. I got a Bradley Beal coming for you.
Maybe there's a middle ground. There's a middle ground there where you try and get in there and you pay a little bit over and expect that instead of him dropping 25%, he drops 10% and you still end up being a winner. But yeah, you think you hit the nail on the head. As any sort of trade in fantasy basketball, psychology is just a part of it. Like how much bullshit can you spin to the other person? How much do they believe it? Yeah. How much do you believe your own bullshit? Like, and do you know this person? What do they do? Who do they like? How do they act? When's the right time to strike? Is their team struggling and they need to make a change? Are they someone who's got an itchy trigger finger? And sorry, I didn't mean to throw that pun in when talking Ja Morant, but is there someone who's just, I need to make a trade. I need to do something. Because there are people like that go, man, I haven't made a trade in 2 days. It's like, well, I just need to throw an offer out there. And then you throw it out at midnight. Maybe they've had a few drinks and they open their phone and go, oh, accept. You never know. There's a whole different different bunch of stuff that happens.
That's next level. Let's close with this. Let's close with your deeper leagues. Maybe any other players on the team. Like, are you going to end up at like even like a 10 or 12 team league? Are you going to try to hope Steven Adams gives you 13 rebounds and 3 assists, or Luke Kennard scores 15, 18 a game or something during the first 25 games? Are there any other players you're looking at maybe in your deeper leagues?
They're probably the 2 that I would talk about there. Now, Adams is one of those interesting ones, again, because we talk about how rankings are determined, right? And we talk about the numbers that come out, and Adams will look pretty rough because he shoots 20% from the free throw line, and that just drags everything down. And you should be well aware of why it's happening. But yeah, he provides elite rebounds. He actually upped his block numbers last season. His field goal percentage is really strong. But because he's the second worst free throw shooter in terms of volume times percentage in the league behind Giannis, it makes him look like he was significantly worse than he was. But if you just take that category away, he was like a top 90, top 80 sort of a player, but he will slide well down those numbers. So when you are looking for that little bit of a boost and you're okay with having a below average free throw percentage, it's fine. You go and grab him. And the Kennard thing is interesting. And I think it's so much is going to depend when we see in preseason, Keith, is what do they do? Like, are they going to start Kennard? Are they going to start Williams? Are they going to start Roddy? Are they going to start LaRavia? Like, someone's got to start. I hope it's Kennard. And if it is, like, no reason. He who is, and you know this, and Grizzlies fans probably know this as well, is legitimately the best 3-point shooter in the NBA that nobody talks about. He hit 49% of his threes last season. He hit 45 the year before that, 46 the year before that. Like that, they are unbelievable numbers. And
he hit 54 on the Grizzlies. I mean, his time on the Grizzlies, he made 54% of his 3-pointers. It was preposterous.
And he's taking a ton of shots out there. And then if you give him those extra minutes and extra shots, and he plays 29 minutes a night, yeah, why couldn't he hit 3 threes a game in those minutes? Even more than that. Like, he is an interesting guy early on in the season. He's pretty limited in some other areas, but we already talked about the lack of, say, ball handling on this team with Jones gone and Morant out. Like, Kennard can do that. There's not many other guys that can on this team, and he might get some extra assist opportunities.
I'll say a free tip for you, Josh, and for anybody else out there. The last 2 seasons, there's been question marks on who's going to start for the Grizzlies opening night. It was like, a couple of seasons ago, it was like, it's going to be Grayson Allen, or is it going to be Bane or Melton? And the next season, it was like, all right, Allen's gone. What are we going to do? Bane? Are we going to like, and then it was like, is Zaire going to do it because we had injuries? Like Dylan Brooks was out a couple years ago, start of the year. This past year, Jaren was out. Every season, the last 3 seasons, there's been questions. Like, it wasn't totally clear who'd be the Grizzlies opening night starters. every season so far, the first preseason game, the starters, that's who ended up starting opening night. They would they would mix it up in the following games. But so far, Taylor Jenkins has showed his hand in the very first preseason game. Like, oh, we went with Grayson Allen. Oh, we went with Desmond Bane. Oh, look, Zaire Williams is out there. And it turned out, if I'm remembering correctly, that ended up being who they started. So I know we've been talking about it constantly on this show. Like, is Kennard going to start? Or maybe they want to keep him as a sixth man and they'll start like Roddy, or they'll give Zaire Williams a chance again. I'm going to guess whatever happens in that first preseason game, providing everybody's healthy, that's going to be what we see on opening night. And if you draft after that first preseason game, you might have a hint that like, okay, Luke Kennard is worth taking with the final pick or whatever.
Yeah, because last season, probably around this time, maybe like a week or two earlier, we were looking, oh, mate, are they going to start Brandon Clark in place of Jaren Jackson? Or maybe that's what they're going to do. And then we just saw Santi Aldama and we had, okay, it's going to be Santi Aldama because they just chucked him straight into that starting line. But okay, well, it's going to be him and everything. We just changed. Well, Clark's value is way down. Aldama's is up for the start of the season. That it was a great indicator. So it is a good point. And it's a great reminder to me to pay attention to see what happens at the start of that preseason, because there are, at least 4 different guys who they could chuck into that spot. And which way they go, I don't know.
Yeah. And also, now that I think about it, I mean, again, if you're in a deeper league, we still have question marks about Steven Adams' health. And then you might end up being like, Santi might be playing more minutes than we expect. And he might, averaging 12.7, if it's 7 boards and 1 block, or if Xavier Tillman, is he rosterable? Can he add 1 3-pointer? Like, he's supposed to add 3-pointers back to his game. He quit taking them. Like, again, this is probably not in your normal leagues or 10-team leagues, but if you're in a deeper league, it's like, all right, maybe Tillman can be a useful guy to have around for 8 rebounds per game. This is, again, if not knowing what the Grizzlies front court is going to look like if Steven Adams is unavailable. Of course, Brandon Clark not expected to be back until, at best case scenario, the very end of the season. So I guess maybe those are some deeper cuts when you're monitoring the Grizzlies front court health situation.
Let me ask you a question, because I have a vague memory of this.
Yep.
Last season, Memphis ran some lineups with center, with Adams and Tillman.
Yeah.
Jaren Jackson, and then Santi at the 3, didn't they?
It was very, very, I don't have it in front of me, very sporadic, very rare. It was not a common thing.
But they did do it, didn't they? They did do it. And I would be, I'm not going to be, look, I'll put it this way, that if that first preseason game comes and Aldama, they're trying something extra big, I wouldn't be like, wow, that's completely crazy. I wouldn't be completely stunned if that is a direction they go.
I mean, I have been a proponent of it just because, like, I think Aldama provides the shooting. Cleaning the glass, by the way, does not have him as having played at the small forward last season. But who knows if that's accurate on this.
Clean the glass doesn't have it, is what you said.
Yeah. They won't let me on small forward. He's not even listed as a pull down option. Let
me have a look on what's NBA Wow. You can have a look at the minutes
I just know
played.
That's a thing that I've suggested. Because he can shoot, and the fact that he can't, like, people like he can't guard a 3. It's like he can't really guard a 4 either, guys. Like it doesn't it doesn't really matter. And if we're talking about trying to dust off Zaire Williams, or if David Wright doesn't have it, like, I'd be fine with playing a little bit bigger because Aldama can shoot. But like this goes back to years past where I was like, they don't ever play Kyle Anderson at the 3. And it's like we had Brandon Clark and Jaren Jackson Jr., who are this perfect front court. We can get away with having a less spacing, slower small forward in like Kyle Anderson. So I don't think they did play very many. I'm not remembering that many last year.
All right, I've got the answer. What
does NBA Wowie say?
NBA Wowie says that he did not play a minute with Jaren and Steven Adams, but they played 24 minutes with Santi, Jaren, and Tillman altogether. 24 minutes.
Ooh, nice.
54 possessions. I'm just going to have a quick look to see if I can see what the net rating was during that time. NBA Wowie doesn't give you a very easy net rating. So it's 109.3 on offense, and on defense, where the hell is this? Okay, well, that's an insane number. Defense, it was a defensive rating of 83.3. So that is what's that? 20 plus 26 net
plus
rating?
20. Yeah. So the key you helped me unlock it was cleaning the glass clocks Jaren is playing the small forward in these lineups. So okay. it's saying a plus 20.9 net rating according to cleaning the glass in these 54 possessions. / 24 minutes that you have uncovered.
Yep. There you go. So it's a gigantically small. That's not the right word. It's very small, almost infinitesimally small, but it did happen. So we'll see.
We'll see. Well, anyways, Josh, a pleasure podcasting with you once again. All you guys out there, if you have fantasy basketball questions, don't hit me up. Hit up Josh and listen to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast. And Josh, hopefully we'll do this again sometime.
Keith, I can't wait.